Welcome to CivilNet. It's my pleasure to be joined today by none other than Tim Jemal, who's the president of Global Arms, which is the primary lobbying organization on Armenian issues in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
We've obviously had a momentous week, but there's massive confusion about what all of this means. And the part that causes the most confusion is the exact specifics of what has been agreed to or publicly released when it comes not to the peace agreement, which was not signed, contrary to its initial to not sign, and it's probably likely never to be signed. We're talking about the specifics of the road, the Trump road, connecting Azerbaijan proper with Nakhchivan. Tell us what is it that we know about that, the facts, and more specifically, given the amount of misinformation, what isn't in it, or actually misunderstanding in many cases?
Sure. So I think the first point you made is very important in that this was not a peace agreement. This was not a signed peace agreement that goes into force and effect between Armenia and Azerbaijan. This was a peace declaration signed by the two presidents of Armenia and Azerbaijan, or the Prime Minister of Armenia, President of Azerbaijan, and then initialized or witnessed by the President of the United States, Donald Trump. So with respect to the road, the Trump transit road, TRIP, it's clear based on our discussions, both beforehand with the Trump administration and what's in the agreement, that this road operates under Armenian sovereignty. I think it's one of the questions that's come up, and I think you've talked about it in your programming, and that was not what Ilham Aliyev had demanded, as you know and your viewers know. For years, Aliyev had demanded extraterritorial control over southern Armenia, labeling it the so-called Zangezur corridor, under which he would have unfettered transit without any inspection of goods transshipping between Azerbaijan and Nakhchivan, and purportedly probably eventually end up in Turkey or somewhere else. So this is not an extraterritorial arrangement. This is an arrangement in terms of a joint venture between the United States and Armenia, that under which Armenia will have sovereign rights.
Okay, that's a good start in the explanation. The reaction to this in Armenia has been essentially twofold. I would say both of them wrong. On the one hand, you have the people around the prime minister who are talking about this is the end of conflict, there'll be no more war, everything has been settled, which is obviously not true. And then you have the other camp, the opposition camp, which is maximalist, that this is simply just another humiliation for the country and nothing good is going to come out of it, and then we're giving up something and getting nothing in return. My question is, what is your view of this? Where do you stand, and what's from your insider perspective, which one of these is correct, or are they both incorrect?
So let's zoom out for a second, Eric. I mean, you've been involved for a number of years. What have we been hearing for years? We're hearing that Armenia has nothing to offer. We're hearing Armenia is not a strategic country, that the United States will never care about Armenia because it doesn't have anything to offer. Decades of that, not only from the some in the diaspora, not everybody, but also in the political elite, among the influencers, and of course the paid Azerbaijan media campaign, lobbying campaign that said Azerbaijan was the country of value to the United States and that Armenia had nothing to offer. So that's been the narrative, and that's essentially been the American de facto position, is that Armenia was not of strategic value to the United States. What has happened is a seismic shift. Armenia now is a strategic partner of the United States and of strategic value, and that what happens in Armenia is now squarely in American interests. Think about that. When we formed Global Arm, two of our three pillars are to strengthen ties between the United States and Armenia, both economically and in terms of security cooperation. The fact that we're now at a point where Armenia is considered a strategic partner, a strategic ally, a strategic interest of the United States under the Trump administration's America First policy, Eric, that's a major development and a significant shift on what has been the policies of American administrations in the past. And I would like to add The last 5 years with Russia as the so-called security protector didn't go very well for Armenia, didn't go very well for Artsakh and Nagorno-Karabakh. How many thousands of young men and women did Armenia and Artsakh lose as a result of so-called Russian protection? Now, I'm not saying America is going to provide all of the solutions, but that formula failed, and it failed miserably. And I think what we're talking about is a new paradigm, an historical shift. And this is not anti-Russian. Of course, Armenia is going to still have an economic relationship with Russia going forward. I think all of our work at Global Arm and our conversations with folks in the Trump administration, from the vice president's office to the National Security Council to the State Department, we're not even talking about conducting actions or implementing policy that's anti-Russian. It's pro-US Armenia. And so that's the framework under which we operate. So I think from that extent, the fact that Armenia now is squarely in the interest of the United States is something very significant. And for years, many of us, including myself, this is what we wanted to see. And now it's happened. Now, I understand there's other things of major concern, and I agree with a lot of those concerns. I assume you'll ask about them.
Yes, I will. The second, I mean, what all of this leads to is there's such a huge Trump stamp on this. The issue is there's two things. One is the Trump factor, and he's by any measure temporary. He's gone in 3.5 years, however you want to measure it. It could be someone from his administration that continues, but we don't know that. That's all an X factor. Secondly, there's never been an agreement in which the other side has not broken. So the issue is, what guarantees is there that the other side isn't going to break these agreements? As you know, when you look at the 17 points agreement that were initialed, today, as we speak, Azerbaijan is actually violating them by demanding a change in our Armenian constitution, which is explicitly prohibited for interfering in the other side's internal affairs, and by putting up all this nonsense about these made-up Western Azerbaijan organizations with making territorial claims on Armenia. So they're already violating something that they haven't even signed. What guarantee is there that they, one day, will not do that? What are the snapbacks on them doing so? And what happens on January 20th, 2029, where Donald Trump isn't there anymore, and his name on this thing is bound to mean less than it does right now?
So I think that's a great question, and these are founded concerns. They're not unfounded. They're legitimate concerns. So I think there's a few things to answer that question, Eric. One, to expedite the development of the Trump route in cooperation with the United States. I think the acceleration of that and moving forward on developing of this Armenia's infrastructure is very important to do that expeditiously. That's one. Two, you alluded to it. It's no small feat that this has Trump's personal assurances on it. The fact that Donald Trump has initialized this declaration and has indicated that he intends and his administration intends to fully implement it, I think is important and a deterrence in and of itself. But clearly, that's not enough. We know that Ilham Aliyev has never honored any agreement he's entered into with respect to Armenia or Artsakh. In fact, dating back to the first Trump administration, 5 minutes after Secretary of State Pompeo, then Secretary of State Pompeo, negotiated a ceasefire between the foreign ministers of Armenia and Azerbaijan. 5 minutes after that, Azerbaijan continued launching drones into Artsakh, and including targeting civilians and civilian populations. So knowing that, we are working right now with Congress on developing a sanctions package that's meaningful, that would impact Ilham Aliyev and his family and state-owned economic interests, that if they engage in an attack on sovereign Armenia anywhere, but including the Trump route, there will be meaningful sanctions, financial conditions, harsh financial penalties on himself, his family, and state-owned entities. And we believe that this will get support in Congress, and we're hopeful it'll get support of the administration. And then the last point about the 3.5 years. So the more we institutionalize this partnership between the United States and Armenia as being a strategic interest of the U.S., the more likely that the Armenia's security will, or the security threat will remain low. Can we eliminate it, Eric? No. You know Ilham Aliyev. I think we all know Ilham Aliyev, and we know his father, Recep Erdogan, his mentor, I guess, if you will, his mentor. So we know how they operate. And if they see an opening, if they see a weakness, they might take advantage of. So our goal is to eliminate any potential weakness and then strengthen all of these deterrence measures that I mentioned. We'll never completely eliminate it, but I think the threat has diminished significantly. And so that gives us an opportunity to develop the partnership between the U.S. and Armenia. And don't forget the energy cooperation, 123 agreements between the U.S. and Armenia on civilian energy. The
nuclear
MOU,
power specifically.
nuclear power agreements. And then don't forget that there will be a series of MOUs coming out between the U.S. and Armenia on economic cooperation in the area of artificial intelligence, semiconductors, infrastructure, mining. All these economic developments, I think, are helpful. But we cannot assume Ilham Aliyev will not dishonor the agreement. We have to assume he will, because past his prologue, and that's been his conduct for the last few years. And I think the administration knows this. They know it. The Trump administration. They know his behavior.
Very good. I'm going to move on to another point that the opposition makes, and they look at this thing and they say, we gave up the road, we gave up Section 907. They'll have some kind of a strategic partnership with the United States, whatever that means, on the other side. And we essentially get nothing for it. There's the issue of reciprocity on the roads. The difference being that the Trump road, which is frankly helpful to them and means very little to us, is codified into this agreement. And it's supposed to open up at the same time that the other routes open that are beneficial to us, but our routes, or whatever is beneficial to us, does not seem to be codified into any agreement. It's left to be, I guess, figured out at some later point. For example, if the roads ever open up in Azerbaijan, what Armenian truck driver in his sane mind will ever drive through that area? So what are we talking about here? Are we getting anything in return, or is it just a U.S. security guarantee at the cost of this road and an enhanced relationship with the United States? Or are we getting anything on the transportation front? And what is that likely to be? Is it likely to be railways opening up, if anything opens up, or is it the border opening up with Turkey? Can you explain that?
So let me start out by agreeing with one thing of the opposition. If that's what you call an opposition. I think the suspension of 907 was a mistake. We don't agree with everything the Trump administration does. I think that.
By the way, can you explain to people what that is? Because
I will
we
do
say that.
So it's something very personal to me as well, having spent many years in the 1990s defending what's called Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act, which is U.S. law, signed into law by President Bush, George Bush, H.W. Bush, the father, which says the U.S. government shall not provide any assistance to the government of Azerbaijan until it ceases all blockades and offensive uses of force against Armenia and Nagorno-Karabakh. This is in U.S. law. And so that law has been in place since 1992. Regrettably, in 2001, under the guise of the war on terror, the administration at the time, the Bush administration, the son now we're into the son, successfully got Congress to pass a waiver, not a repeal, a waiver of the law that allows the administration to waive these sanctions on Azerbaijan if it's deemed in the national security interests of the United States. They did that every single year for 20 years until 2022. In 2022, they did not exercise the waiver of Section 907 that allows assistance to the government of Azerbaijan. And then in 2023, after Azerbaijan committed the genocide and ethnic cleansing against Nagorno-Karabakh, even when the U.S. said don't do it, they did it. had no consequences. So then Assistant Secretary of State James O'Brien said in November of 2023 before Congress, we are not going to waive Section 907 of the Freedom Support Act. So for the last 3 years, from 2020, I think June of 2022 until today, those sanctions have been in place and not waived by any administration. So that's the explanation of that. I think it's unfortunate. It's something I don't agree with. But I think in terms of like the benefits to Armenia, the development of the infrastructure in southern Armenia in cooperation with the United States is significant, Eric. And I think that the benefits to Sunik and the people of Sunik, I think in terms of potential job opportunities and economic development are significant. I agree with you. I think there is reciprocity in the declaration, and that needs to be clarified so that it's not considered a unilateral benefit. The assumption is that Armenia, of course, should be able to, in terms of reciprocity, should be able to transship its goods also through Nakhichevan, not just to Turkey, but to northern Armenia. So this needs to be a truly open transportation route. So I think there are some benefits to that to Armenia. I don't think it's a unilateral benefit for Azerbaijan. And let's just say more symbolically, one of the things we as Global Arm recommended and the administration agreed, again, it's symbolic. I understand it. Stop calling it a corridor and stop calling it the Zangezur corridor. And they did. And as you know, that name is gone. It's, of course, now the Trump route.
Let's move on to our other neighbor, Turkey. There's a lot of concern here, or rumors, that Mr. Erdogan's hands were all over this plan. I'm not sure where this comes from, but it's out there. And there's concerns about what Turkey's role will be in this road, or managing this road, or taking part in its construction. Do you know anything about that? Are these is this misinformation, or is there something to it, or is there something we don't know?
I don't know of anything to it. I don't think Turkey had anything to do with the development of the peace declaration itself and the road, the development of the Trump road. I don't believe that Turkey's behind it. Is it possible that they tried to have influence on it? Of course. I mean, that would be foolish to assume they haven't had tried to have influence on this process. We have stated, so I don't believe that this is a Turkish agreement. I believe this is a U.S. agreement that was supported by the government of Armenia and the government of Azerbaijan. And so, we have stated, I mean, even before we started Global Arm a few years ago, Eric, I mean, back in when Turkey began its blockade in effectively in 1992-ish is when it really started and stopped, and then went in full operation in 1993. We've called for the unconditional lifting of the blockade. And I mean, the Armenian government, whether it was past governments of Kocharian and Sarah Sarkisian, and now today to Nikol Pashinyan, every Armenian government has essentially said, I think even been very gracious to say, we will open the border under no preconditions. I mean, I don't think that position hasn't changed much over the years. And so that I think the border, we issued a statement, we called on Turkey to open to cease its blockade, open its border. But to your main point, do I think that this was somehow controlled by Recep Erdogan? No, I don't think so.
Well, there's actually a side story with this, because I think it was yesterday that the head of the Turkish, or what is the titular head of the Turkish opposition, the mayor of Istanbul, who's in jail, actually criticized Erdogan for Turkey having no role in mediating this, which was an interesting point. I don't know if you read that. Go ahead.
I didn't see it. No.
Let's move on to an issue that's near and dear to our heart. Part of the conversations that was live, actually, on video between the Prime Minister and President Trump was the issue of the hostages, or as President Trump referred to them as Christian hostages, which is actually quite telling, because it tells you where this pressure and where this information to him is coming from. What do you see moving forward? Has the issue of freeing the hostages been raised directly with the regime in Baku, that this is unacceptable at this point, that these people need to be freed? What do we know about that? And what is it that we can do to further push this agenda forward and free these people out of the dungeons of Baku?
So I can't speak about everything the Armenian government's doing, but I can tell you about what we're doing and what we've heard from the Trump administration is that the release of the prisoners is a priority, I would say a top priority for the administration at all levels, whether it's the State Department, the White House itself, the National Security Council, and the Office of Vice President Vance. It is an important issue. It is a key priority for them. And do I wish they would have been released by now? Of course. But I can assure you that this is something that is on the agenda actively as we speak. And I believe that I will never make any declaration because that's not fair to the prisoners or their families. I would just say that this is a priority and we're going to do everything possible to make sure that their unconditional release occurs soon. On the issue of right of return, it is on the agenda, the right of return for the Artsakhs who were ethnically cleansed from Baku. I've seen a couple of social media reports that it's dead. It's not dead. It's alive in conversations. It's a little more involved, of course, than some of the other issues, like the prisoner release. But I believe that there is a pathway to do that, and we're going to be actively involved with that process and making sure that the administration stays engaged. And to the administration's own, I mean, their own words are, this is important to us. And those are the words we're hearing directly from people in the Trump administration. And let me just say this on the occupation, and that's one of the other issues, of course, is the blockade. I'm sorry, the occupation of sovereign Armenia by Azerbaijan. I believe that the Trump route will not open until Azerbaijan removes all of their forces from Armenia. I believe you will see that emerge as a consensus position in Washington over the next few weeks, that the road will not be open for any cargo coming from Azerbaijan until they remove every single military installation in person from the sovereign territory of Armenia.
Okay, I've heard this in different formats, but is this in the conversation? Has this been in the conversation, or is this something that's going to be in the conversation? And I just want, I mean, because there's rumors of this have been there since last week, but I haven't seen, and I've heard it from very credible people. How real is this?
I know it's frustrating. I totally get it. I totally get it. I know it's frustrating. I understand that. I can't stand the fact when I go to Jarmuk, I look at the Azeri flags on Armenian territory. I know you hate it. We hate it. It's wrong and it needs to end. I can tell you that it's real. The conversations are real. I wish I could say more about that, but I believe that you'll see that in the coming weeks that'll become policy.
One of the other, one of the last questions I'm going to have is, one of the biggest things that were missed was the side memorandums, specifically on enhancing Armenia-US relations, and you sort of alluded to that. Yes, and you know the biggest one in there is obviously the components when it comes to microchips and other specific dual-use technologies, or in some cases very specific military technologies, that we've had to get really we have to go through very cumbersome waiver processes or never get them. From what I understand, the president essentially waived all of these on the spot. So this is critically important for our military-industrial complex that's constantly growing and getting into more fields on the defense side. And a corollary to this, which is not mentioned but everybody knows about, is the fact that defense sales are finally going to be open to us, because Armenia now essentially can buy weapons from almost every other Western country except the United States. And that seems to have been lifted because there are US weapons that Armenia wants to buy. Obviously, I think the negative with this is I think it opens up for the other side also. But frankly, for our defense purposes, given the symmetry of power, those are a lot more useful to us than they are for the other side.
Yes, I think well stated, Eric. I can't disagree with anything that you said in terms of the opening of weapon sales. I believe it will be open to Armenia to now purchase U.S. weapons. And and it will be open also to the other side. It sure looks that way and going in that direction. But I think on the economic side, one of the things that we have been lobbying for the last 4 years is the lessening or the lessening of export controls. And so what we've seen, and you alluded to it, so Armenia is now categorized in a category called D, which is highly restrictive on the ability for Armenia to import technology products from the United States, dual use products. So now we're going to see these export controls, these restrictions are going to be lessened significantly and would allow Armenia now to import really these important technologies that are critical to the development of the technology sector in Armenia, artificial intelligence. So I think that that's really something that should not get lost in all of this, that those export controls will be reduced going forward. And yeah.
Go ahead. You were going to finish?
No, I was going to say, look, I saw this morning that maybe I caught something. Ilham Aliyev is still making commands of demands of the United States, acting as if he's the regional hegemon. And I think those are clearly not in the spirit and actually content of the peace declaration. And so we will be advocating very strongly with those in the administration that kind of rhetoric that just it needs to stop. And I agree that it's a violation of what was signed just a few days ago.
Well, I mean, my position on this, which I've made clear, is when all is said and done, we've bought ourselves a couple of years to achieve deterrence. All the rest of it, I'll believe it when I see it. I'm going to close with a very hard question, which I know you cannot answer, but it needs to be dealt with. This Friday, there's going to be a meeting between President Trump and President Putin in Alaska. This is in regards to ending the Ukraine war. For all we know, the way the war is going, it could end very soon because of where the very terrible position that the Ukraine is in the war and the actual front at this stage. And the Russian economy itself is being strained. So there's a lot of pressure to actually end this war very soon on very bad terms for Ukraine and on pretty favorable ones for Russia. My question for you, that agreement or lack of agreement is going to shape U.S.-Russia relations in the sense that it's going to be good, it's going to be bad, or it's going to be neutral. What is the best outcome? For Armenia's purposes, what's the best outcome? Good Russian-U.S. relations, neutral, or poor? Which one is the most beneficial for us from your perspectives in Washington, D.C.?
Boy, you asked a hard question. I think the best position is to have a Russia that's not able to undertake hybrid warfare and nefarious activities against Armenia. And so under those three options, I think you can guess which one probably is best for Armenia. I think the ensuring that Russia is not in a position to conduct activities that are against the interests of Armenia, against the people, the economy, and of course to exert themselves somehow militarily in Armenia. The restricting the ability of Russia to do that is, I think, in the interests of Armenia, and I think it would be the best outcome. Now, which one of those three does that? I think you could probably guess which one of those three does that. And I think one of the things you saw the vacuum that has taken place already. The fact that it was the United States that brokered this peace declaration and that it was not Russia. I think that in and of itself speaks volumes of the current influence of Russia geopolitically at the moment in the South Caucasus. Does it mean that Russia cannot start to meddle again and engage in activities that are not in the interests of the people of Armenia? Of course, they certainly can do that. I will want to say one other thing. I don't know if you caught this, you probably did, knowing who you are, that it appears that Iran has come out and supported the Trump route. So I think that some initial concerns were legitimate that this border with Armenia and Iran, which is important, for Armenia's economic interests, that border itself would be thwarted or cut off. That's not the case. And everything all the conversations that we've had with the administration leading up to this peace declaration is consistent with that.
Well, I think on the Iranian side, I don't think I wouldn't call it necessarily support, but if you look at the official statements of President Pezeshkian specifically, this is not something that they're gonna try to interfere with. And at the same time, Iran is actually trying to have conversations with the United States. So I don't think given the fact that the Iranian border does not get cut off or isn't affected by this, and I think that's been made clear to them, and it doesn't affect transportation between these two countries. I don't think they're going to object. They're going to object, and I think the only critical objection I heard was from the foreign minister or the advisor, Ali Akbar Velayati, who was the foreign advisor to the supreme leader. But beyond that, the Iranian response has actually been quite measured. Tim, I want to thank you for joining us and enlightening us in all of these very critical issues. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for joining CivilNet.